I partly selected this image because it was on a flat white background, which is a good opportunity to introduce one of the other selection tools, which we haven't been using so much, and that is the magic wand. It is one of the earliest. If I click and hold on here on the quick selection tool, it's stacked with the magic wand tool. And here we are. So the magic wand tool looks at areas of continuous color and selects that. So one of the things, if I'm trying to create a selection of this slice of, I assume that's orange, some sort of citrus, sometimes it's easier to select the background than the foreground because the background is a solid color. We ought to be able to create a selection based on that rather than telling Photoshop all the different colors here that are part of the selection. Just look at the stuff we don't want. Now, there are a couple things about the magic wand you want to know. It looks at areas of continuous color. You click on it, and then there's a tolerance. Now, I'm going to put this at 0 for demonstration purposes. And I'm also going to bring up I'm going to use the eyedropper to look at the values here. And so I'm going to open up the info window here. Here you see the RGB values and the CMYK. And as I move over the background, you see RGB is at 255, 255, 255, which is pure white. All of this area is pure white. Now as I move closer to the slice, we start seeing some other values. Going down to, say, 253 there. I saw 251 a second ago. And then when you get into the orange, that's completely different. Okay, so there's a 249 value in there. Right, so with a tolerance of 0 on the magic wand, it's only going to select the color I click on and nothing else. So I click there, and you see that it's selected all the area that is pure white. Now you can always add and subtract. So if I hold Shift, I could go in and start clicking on things and adding more bits to that. I could tell it to select things that are not contiguous. So as I'm going along the edge here and click on different shades of gray here, it's only doing the ones that I'm clicking on with 0 tolerance. If I deselect contiguous, then it'll start selecting those wherever they are. So all around the edge, but also in the center here, which I don't want. So I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is add some tolerance here. So we saw that there are values in the background that went from like 249 to 255, so that's in terms of distance between the numbers, that's like a difference of like 6. If I go in here and type in like tolerance of 6 and click on the same white background, you see it's getting a lot more of it, almost all of it, but there's some values that are still out of range. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to bump it up to 16. 16 is probably even the default value. If I click now, notice that it's getting pretty much all of the whites. But I've selected the background. What I want is a selection of the foreground. So there are a couple ways you could think about that. I could go to select it and I can do the inverse to get this. Although sometimes you'll end up with a selection around the edge of the image. Let me deselect. Another way to approach this is to first select all, so the entire image is selected. I don't need the info anymore. And now I'm going to, from my selection, so everything is selected now, but I want to remove the background from my selection, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on the white. And now it's removed all the white background from my selection, leaving only the orange slice. So this is a useful approach to doing things. Sometimes you create a selection and then you subtract from that to get what you want. Sometimes you select something and then you invert it to get what you want. But let's take a look at this now in the select and mask. Okay, here on a white background, it was on a white background before, so that's not showing us very much. If I go in and look at this on a black background, it'll show us if we picked up any white from the background as a fringe. And pretty much we haven't, maybe a tiny little bit down here, but it looks like it did a pretty good job. If I wanted to try to get rid of some more of that, I could shift in. And that'll trim, very often that'll trim off any little bit of fringe around the edge. I'm actually not seeing very much change there. If I go the opposite direction, we should start seeing kind of white noise around here that we don't want. So as I shift in, you see it's pulling it in. But it's still kind of noisy. So one thing I might want to do here is add smoothing. And once you add smoothing, then the shift edge often has a more visible effect. So here we're shifting it out. We're getting some of that white background we don't want. Shifting it back in. And with some of these, you have to give it a couple of seconds to actually detect what you're looking for. So here we did a little smoothing because it was kind of a noisy selection. And then we shifted it in and we lost the little bit of white we had down here at the bottom. And now we have a pretty good looking selection. If I go in, I could look at this as a black and white image. That often shows you any kind of extraneous things that you might have missed. But this looks pretty good. So I'm going to select OK. So here I have the selection I want. Now I want to do something with it, and again, I'm going to create a layer mask. And there we are. Now I'm going to take this, and again, okay, my Melon Head copy is all the way over here. So because I'm working with a fairly low resolution here, let me slide this over so it's closer to the Melon Head. Okay, so I'm going to drag this to the Melon Head, and then drop it right on there. Now the resolution of this image is going to be limited by the resolution of the head. It was a lower res image than a lot of the other things. So at this point, there are a couple things I could consider. I could just shrink this down, and that is going to, well, it's going to be destructive. We're going to lose resolution, but ultimately we're going to be limited by the resolution of the base image here. So that's not so bad. If I want to retain all this for possible future use, one thing I could do here is go in here and convert this to a smart object. That menu might be off screen for you. So I right-clicked, convert to smart object, and now we have the smart object icon there, and the display here changes a little bit. I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt so that as I resize this, it's proportional. And I move it over here where I think I want the eyes to be. And then I'm going to copy it to make a second eye. I'm not sure if I mentioned that I was going to use this for the eye, but you saw the image I did before. And you don't have to use all these images the same way. You can kind of make your own solution. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Name this eye. And that's the right eye, or my left. I'm going to go ahead and call it the right eye because it's the Melon Head's right eye. Now I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to hold down the Alt. I have the Move tool. I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And you see the cursor change. And I'm going to drag this over here. And it's providing some guides. If I hold down the Shift key, it will constrain it to be perfectly horizontal move, which you don't have to if your head looks different. Now I'm going to move this one a little bit to the left. I'm going to use the keyboard. I'm going to use the left and right arrow keys on the keyboard. Or here, if I hold down the Shift and arrow, it moves like 10 pixels at a time instead of 1. And I'm just going to create a little more space between the eyes because I'm going to be putting the nose in there. Okay, so I have 2 eyes. And I have my right eye and right eye copy, but really, that's the left eye. Okay, so there's that. Now, one of the things I do that wasn't part of the original with this is to use layer styles to add some extra dimension to this. I don't use layer styles a lot. This is an opportunity to talk about layer styles a little bit. What I want to do is I want to create like an eye socket for these eyes. So I'm going to go down here, and there are usually better ways than using layer styles for most things. But I'm going to go down to the effects here, layer styles, and I'm going to add a drop shadow. Okay, now that was off screen, so this resolution makes things a little bit difficult. Okay, well you can see most of it here. All right, so you see a drop shadow. Now drop shadows, and when we do the photo montage, we'll be looking at how to create shadows in a perspective environment. Because drop shadows are like a graphic design tool where you usually applied to like text to make it look like it's floating above the image. So it's really meant for that. It's for like something casting a shadow on like something flat behind it. But we're going to take advantage of it here. So here you see the drop shadow, but if you look at the lighting here, the melon is lit from above and a little to the left, creating shading. If we want to create a socket, like a concave aspect here, we want the shading on the other side. So this is the angle of the lighting. We shifted it over there. Now, by default, these shadows are black, but that's not very natural. If you look at the shading, because this is essentially shading on the melon, and we have an example here of what that should look like. If you look down here, this is what a shaded part of the melon should look like. Oops, here I'm dragging the... That's one thing with the drop shadow, you can drag it around to position it. What we want for shading is this color here. So instead of black, I'm going to go in here and click on one of the darkest parts of the melon shading to get a natural shade for that. I'm going to click OK. Now here I'm going to increase the spread to make this a little bit bigger. Size softens it, and actually I probably just want kind of more of that. And then position it over this direction so that we have the lighting coming down like this, and a little bit over. It might be a little too big for what I want. Okay, so that's kind of more of the eye socket that I want. Although if it's too much, I can use the opacity to back that off, or that's at 100%. So I kind of want to get the same kind of look I have down here. So there's the color that's being applied and the blending mode. In this unit, we're looking at blending modes. Multiply is typically what's used for shadow, and I have a little lecture talking about blending modes and multiply in particular. But with multiply, you always get a result that's darker than either of the two things that are being multiplied. Here we have the melon head in the background. Those pixels being multiplied with this color and creating something darker than either one of those. There's softness to the shadow. There's spread. And there's distance. You can also change the contour, which will affect, here it's kind of going in and out, But for what we're looking for, we want either like a straight line, or you can contour it like this, or maybe like this. I might leave it with this one down here. And bring it in a little bit. Okay, so this is using drop shadow to shade things to create a concave feature on the melon. Now I want the same thing over here, and here you see the effects on the right eye. I'm going to make a copy of this to the left eye, so I'm just going to hold, again, the Alt key and drag. Alt and dragging is how you copy things. Left eye, I'm going to open up the drop shadow to reposition it just a little bit. The symmetry of the head means that you're going to want that to be a little bit different. And so here I have the eyes.